The Sierra Nevada loomed, a stoic titan against the bruised twilight sky, as the Miller family, Sarah, her husband David, and their spirited 10-year-old daughter Lily, began their descent from Yosemite. The air, crisp with the scent of pine and impending autumn, carried the last whispers of their laughter, echoing off ancient granite faces. Their minivan, a humble vessel of joy, navigated the winding mountain roads, its headlights cutting fleeting paths through the encroaching darkness. Lily, nestled in the back, clutched her worn teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, dreaming of campfire stories and s'mores under a canopy of stars. It was a memory etched in Sarah's mind, a perfect tableau before the void swallowed them whole. The last call came from David, a quick check-in with his sister, promising to be home before midnight. Then, silence. An oppressive, suffocating silence that settled over Sarah's world, heavy as the mountain fog. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, each passing moment a dull ache in her chest, a phantom limb of hope slowly atrophying. The vast wilderness of Yosemite, once a sanctuary of natural beauty, transformed into a monstrous maw, devouring her family without a trace. The authorities, thorough yet ultimately fruitless, eventually declared it a cold case, a tragic, inexplicable vanishing act. Sarah, a woman of fervent faith before, found her beliefs eroded by the relentless tide of grief. The God she knew, the one who watched over sparrows and answered prayers, felt distant, a silent observer to her torment. Her purpose, once so clearly defined by the laughter and love of her family, dissolved into a formless void. The once vibrant home became a mausoleum of memories, each untouched toy, each empty chair, a fresh wound. She drifted through life, a specter of her former self, tethered to a sorrow too profound for words. The media circus faded, leaving behind only the hushed whispers of a community grappling with the unthinkable. Theories abounded: a rogue bear attack, a treacherous rockslide, even abduction, each more terrifying than the last, none offering solace. Sarah, however, clung to a desperate, irrational sliver of hope that somewhere, somehow, they were still alive, trapped in a forgotten corner of the vast wilderness. This fragile hope was a constant, agonizing hum beneath the surface of her despair, preventing her from truly moving on. Years turned into more than a decade, the case file gathering dust in a forgotten drawer. Sarah's hair had silvered, her eyes held a weariness that transcended age, yet the hollowness in her heart remained. She visited Lily's empty room, the Mr. Snuggles teddy bear still perched on her pillow, a silent testament to a life abruptly halted. The mountains, visible from her window, seemed to mock her with their impenetrable secrets, their ancient peaks holding the answers she so desperately craved, yet refusing to yield them. A silent promise echoed in her soul. One day, she would find them. 13 years later, the silence was shattered not by a scream, but by the quiet hum of a metal detector. Ethan Vance, a retired park ranger with a passion for amateur exploration, traversed a less-traveled fire road deep within the Sierra foothills, far from the established trails of Yosemite. He was searching for remnants of old logging camps, a hobby that usually yielded rusted tools and forgotten trinkets. The signal, when it came, was unusually strong, resonating with a deep, resonant thrum, pulling him off his usual path. He followed the signal, pushing through thick brush and navigating a steep, rocky incline, the air growing heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The vegetation was dense, almost impenetrable, concealing a hidden ravine that dropped sharply from the road above. It was the kind of place nature reclaimed with fierce possessiveness, where forgotten things could rest undisturbed for decades, shielded from prying eyes by a thick canopy of old-growth trees. Then he saw it, partially obscured by fallen timber and overgrown ivy, a glint of faded blue metal. As he cleared away the debris, the shape emerged with horrifying clarity: the rusted, mangled shell of a minivan. It lay on its side, a skeletal remains of what was once a family vehicle, its windows shattered, its once vibrant color now a dull, faded blue-green, almost blending with the surrounding foliage. A chill, colder than the mountain air, crept up Ethan's spine, a premonition of something deeply unsettling. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert, a prickle of unease raising the hairs on his arms. The silence here was different, not the peaceful quiet of the forest, but a heavy, expectant stillness, as if the very trees held their breath. The open driver's side door hung precariously, a gaping maw. It was clear the vehicle had been there for a very long time, consumed by the elements, a ghost in the wilderness. He peered inside, expecting nothing, yet dreading everything. What he saw inside the passenger compartment offered no immediate answers, only more questions. The interior was a chaotic mess of shattered glass, torn fabric, and dried leaves. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just the detritus of time. But as his gaze drifted towards the back, a faint outline caught his eye. Something was nestled deep within the rusted cavity of the trunk. Something small and familiar, yet terrifyingly out of place. He paused, his breath catching in his throat, a sense of foreboding washing over him, knowing this discovery was far more significant than any relic he'd found before. The police tape, a vibrant yellow against the muted greens and browns of the forest, felt like a desecration. Sarah stood behind it, her hand pressed against the rough bark of a pine tree, as if drawing strength from its ancient roots. The air hummed with the quiet urgency of forensic teams, their hushed voices carrying on the gentle breeze. The minivan, now meticulously documented, was slowly being prepared for removal. A macabre archaeological dig. Her heart, a dormant volcano for so long, began to stir. A painful, unfamiliar throb, a desperate plea for recognition. An officer, his face etched with a mix of compassion and professional detachment, approached her. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice soft, "we found something in the trunk." He held out a clear evidence bag. Inside, nestled among fragments of dried leaves and a scattering of rust, was a small, well-worn teddy bear. Its fur was matted, its one remaining button eye stared blankly, but Sarah recognized it instantly, with a jolt that sent a tremor through her entire being. It was Lily's Mr. Snuggles, a silent echo of a life stolen too soon. The sight of the bear, a tangible link to her lost daughter, was like a lightning bolt, tearing through the fog of grief that had enveloped her for so long. It wasn't just an object. It was a conduit to a past she had tried to bury, a key turning in a lock she thought was permanently sealed. A wave of nausea washed over her, followed by a surge of raw, untamed determination. This wasn't just a recovery. It was a reawakening, a demand for answers, a primal scream against the injustice. The police investigation, rekindled with the discovery, focused on the location of the car. It was found deep in a ravine, off a seldom-used service road, far from any common driving route to Yosemite. The car showed no signs of a crash consistent with its location. The damage indicated it had been deliberately pushed, or perhaps even dropped, into the ravine, implying a cold, calculating intent. The details were perplexing, pointing not to a tragic accident, but to something far more sinister and premeditated. As Sarah held the evidence bag, her fingers tracing the faded fur of Mr. Snuggles, a single potent thought ignited within her. This isn't an accident. The quiet despair that had consumed her for 13 years began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning ember of purpose. The teddy bear, once a symbol of innocence and loss, now became an unexpected harbinger of truth, pulling her back from the brink of spiritual desolation, whispering promises of a justice long denied. A testament to a truth waiting to be unearthed. The call from the police, confirming the discovery of human remains within the vehicle, 3 sets, consistent with her family, plunged Sarah into a fresh abyss of grief, but also solidified her resolve. The initial shock, numbing and surreal, quickly hardened into a steel-edged determination. No longer adrift, she found herself anchored by a singular, unyielding purpose: to understand how they died and who was responsible. The faith she thought lost now flickered, a tiny, defiant flame within the cavern of her soul. She began her own investigation, a desperate pilgrimage back to the remnants of her past. Her first stop was the small, close-knit mountain community where David had grown up, a place steeped in tradition and shadowed by the towering pines. She started by revisiting the local church, a rustic stone edifice nestled among ancient cedars, where David had once served as a beloved youth pastor, his sermons echoing through its venerable halls. The stained glass windows, depicting biblical scenes, cast muted colors across the wooden pews, a stark contrast to the darkness she felt within. Pastor Thomas, a man whose gentle demeanor had once been a source of comfort, greeted her with a strained cordiality. His eyes, usually warm and welcoming, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Sympathy, perhaps, but also a hint of unease, a guardedness she hadn't noticed before. He spoke of the family's disappearance with hushed tones, recalling the community's collective sorrow, yet his answers felt superficial, carefully constructed, like a dam holding back a torrent of unspoken words. She sifted through old church records, searching for any anomaly, any forgotten detail that might shed light on David's last days. She spoke to elderly parishioners, their memories fading like old photographs, yet sometimes yielding a fragmented detail, a half-remembered conversation. One elderly woman, Mrs. Albright, a fixture in the community for decades, mentioned a disagreement David had with certain church elders, a vague reference to finances and a new building project, before quickly changing the subject with a nervous cough, her eyes wide with a secret she dared not speak. The more she dug, the more she felt an unsettling current beneath the placid surface of the community. It was a subtle shift in conversation, a sudden silence, a fleeting glance exchanged between parishioners when David's name came up. The air, once thick with shared grief, now felt heavy with unspoken truths, a conspiracy of silence. Each seemingly innocent conversation, each polite deflection, only deepened her conviction that the family's disappearance was not a random act, but a secret carefully guarded within the very heart of the community, a pact of silence forged in fear. The clues began to surface like stones pushed up by a hidden spring, each one chillingly precise. A yellowed ledger, found tucked away in a dusty box in the church's forgotten archives, revealed glaring inconsistencies in the financial records related to the new community center project, a pet project of David's. Large sums of money, supposedly allocated for building materials, were unaccounted for, signed off by Pastor Thomas and a few prominent elders, their signatures stark against the fading ink. The dates coincided eerily with the time leading up to the Miller family's disappearance, forming an undeniable pattern. Sarah's suspicions solidified into cold, hard certainty. The disagreement Mrs. Albright mentioned now took on a sinister new meaning. David, known for his unwavering integrity and meticulous nature, would undoubtedly have discovered the discrepancies. He wouldn't have just ignored them. He would have confronted those responsible, his moral compass unwavering, even against figures of authority, his commitment to truth absolute. The thought sent a cold dread through her, realizing the depth of the corruption she was uncovering, and the deadly consequences of David's integrity. She found herself drawn to the old, neglected cemetery on the outskirts of town, where generations of the community rested. It was a place of quiet reflection, but also of hidden stories, whispered among the moss-covered gravestones. An old groundskeeper, a gruff but kind man named Silas, who had known David since he was a boy, shared fragmented memories. He spoke of David's passionate sermons on honesty and accountability, and how some of those sermons had caused unsettling reactions among certain influential members of the congregation, their discomfort almost visible. Silas, with a knowing glance, pointed to the meticulously kept grave of an elder who had passed away shortly after the Millers' disappearance, a man named Bartholomew Thorne, a prominent real estate developer and a major donor to the church. Thorne was a powerful man, Silas murmured, his voice barely a whisper. And he didn't like anyone questioning his dealings, especially not a young pastor. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the crisp mountain air, thick with the weight of unspoken history. The more she learned, the more an insidious narrative began to form in her mind. David, uncovering the financial misdeeds, likely confronted Thorne and his accomplices. Their desperate attempt to silence him led to the unimaginable tragedy that stole her family. The truth, once a faint whisper, was now screaming, but she needed irrefutable proof. The tension within the community became palpable, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and complicity. Her questions, once met with polite, albeit vague answers, now evoked outright hostility from some of the elders. They dismissed her inquiries as a product of her grief, urging her to let the past rest for the good of the community, their voices edged with impatience. Their eyes, once filled with feigned sympathy, now held a glint of warning, a veiled threat she couldn't ignore. Pastor Thomas, his face a mask of concern, paid her an unexpected visit, his voice laced with thinly veiled warnings. He spoke of the sanctity of the church, the need for forgiveness, and the dangers of dwelling on the past. "Some truths are better left undisturbed, Sarah," he had said, his eyes avoiding hers. "For the good of everyone." His words, once comforting, now felt like an attempt to silence her. A desperate plea to preserve a fragile facade that was rapidly crumbling. She remembered David's unwavering commitment to truth, his quiet courage in the face of injustice. That memory became her shield, her resolve hardening with each new obstacle. She had found a faded photograph among David's personal effects, a group shot of the church elders at a groundbreaking ceremony for the community center. Among them, smiling broadly, was Bartholomew Thorne, his arm around Pastor Thomas, their faces radiating a shared conspiratorial glee, a chilling foreshadowing of the Dark Alliance. One evening, as she returned to her car parked near the church, she found her tires slashed. A chilling message, scrawled in red paint on the windshield, read, "Leave it alone." The message was clear, menacing, a desperate attempt to intimidate her into abandoning her quest. Fear gnawed at her, but beneath it, a furious anger ignited. They would not win. She would not let them bury David and Lily twice. This was a war, and she was ready to fight. The conflict now felt like a desperate chess match, with Sarah moving pieces against unseen opponents. The truth, she knew, lay hidden behind a wall of silence and complicity, protected by those who valued their reputations and perceived spiritual authority over honesty and justice. The tension was almost unbearable, the air thick with unspoken threats, a silent battle for the soul of a community and the memory of a family, a battle she intended to win. The confrontation unfolded in the hallowed halls of the church during a tense, unscheduled meeting of the elders. Sarah, armed with her ledger, the photograph, and the unyielding weight of her grief, faced them down. The air crackled with a palpable unease, the stained glass windows seeming to mock the darkness that had festered beneath their sacred roof. Pastor Thomas, his face ashen, stood at the head of the table, his eyes darting nervously between Sarah and the other elders, a man trapped between his conscience and his fear. She laid out her evidence with a cold, steady voice, detailing the financial discrepancies, the dates, the connections to Bartholomew Thorne, and the unsettling timeline that coincided with her family's disappearance. She spoke of David's unwavering moral compass, his likely discovery of the embezzlement, and the inevitable confrontation that would have followed. The elders shifted in their seats, their faces a mixture of defiance, fear, and dawning horror, as the truth began to pierce their carefully constructed defenses. Just as Pastor Thomas, his voice trembling, began to deny everything, urging the others to dismiss her accusations as unfounded and blasphemous, a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the room. It was Silas, the old groundskeeper, his face etched with a quiet, resolute sorrow. In his hand, he clutched a small, leather-bound diary, Bartholomew Thorne's personal journal, which he had discovered hidden in an old shed on the church property, a shed Thorne used for private meetings, a hidden confession waiting to be revealed. Silas, with a voice surprisingly strong for his age, began to read excerpts from the diary. It detailed Thorne's scheme to embezzle church funds through inflated construction contracts, implicating Pastor Thomas and other elders in the cover-up. It chillingly described the unfortunate incident with David Miller, who had threatened to expose them, and the subsequent disposal of his family and the minivan to ensure their silence. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence, broken only by Silas's steady voice. The truth, raw and brutal, hung in the air, undeniable. Pastor Thomas collapsed into his chair, tears streaming down his face, finally broken by the weight of his guilt. The other elders, their faces stripped bare of their composure, looked away, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. The quiet sanctuary of the church had become a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. The years of silence, the carefully crafted lies, had finally imploded under the relentless pursuit of justice. The intervention, a quiet act of moral courage from an unexpected source, shattered the carefully constructed lie. The police, alerted by an anonymous tip, later revealed to be Silas, driven by a conscience that could no longer bear the burden, arrived as Thorne's damning words echoed through the room. The truth, buried for so long, finally surfaced, exposed in the sacred space it had once defiled. Justice, delayed but not denied, was delivered swift and decisive. The elders were arrested, their faces grim and defeated, their reputations irrevocably tarnished, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. The community watched, stunned and heartbroken, as the figures they had once revered were led away in handcuffs. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town, forcing them to confront the darkness that had festered beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful existence, a painful but necessary reckoning. In the aftermath, Sarah stood by Lily's small, newly marked grave, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the ancient oak above. Her family's names were finally cleared, their story now one of tragic heroism, not mysterious disappearance. The cold emptiness in her heart began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of peace, a fragile but growing understanding that justice, though slow, had arrived, restoring a measure of dignity to her lost loved ones. The painful journey had reconnected her to a faith she thought lost. It wasn't the blind faith of her youth, but a deeper, more resilient conviction forged in the fires of grief and discovery. She understood that even in the deepest shadows, light, truth, and purpose could ultimately prevail, and that even the most corrupted places could be cleansed. She found strength not just in belief, but in the unwavering pursuit of what was right. Sarah, no longer a specter of grief, began to engage with life again. She founded a nonprofit dedicated to helping families of missing persons, advocating for cold cases to be reopened, ensuring no one else suffered the same agonizing uncertainty. Her pain had transformed into purpose, her sorrow into strength. The Sierra Nevada still loomed, but now its ancient peaks seemed to whisper not of secrets, but of enduring hope, and the quiet triumph of truth.